The sky over Chicago was a dull, unbroken gray, the kind that made the glass walls of Martin Kellerman's office feel even colder. From my seat across his desk, I could see the skyline stretching behind him, but my attention was fixed on the man in front of me. He flipped through my 5-year performance portfolio as if it were a menu at a diner, skimming without tasting a single word. I had spent weeks assembling it, 5 years of sacrificed weekends, salvaged contracts, and flawless compliance audits distilled into 20 glossy pages. His eyes barely slowed on any of them. Finally, he shut the folder with a practiced motion, slid it to the side, and leaned back in his leather chair. "You're not ready for leadership, Clarice," he said, as though the sentence had been rehearsed. Not yet. The words hit me with the sharp precision of a scalpel, cutting clean without the courtesy of anesthesia. My jaw tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. The way I'd learned to do in boardrooms that weren't built for me, that was when I saw it just to his right. Half covered by his forearm, a thick navy folder stamped with the Garrison Tech logo, the pre-contract agreement. I didn't need to open it to know what it contained. I'd personally built the custom workflows that would make that deal possible, systems so specific and interlinked that without me, the implementation would stall before it even began. I felt my pulse slow, an odd kind of clarity settling in. Martin thought this was the end of the conversation. He didn't realize he'd just left the door wide open. "I see," I said, my voice even. "Thank you for the feedback." His attention was already drifting back to his computer, fingers tapping the keyboard before I'd even risen from my chair. I stood, smoothing my jacket, and walked toward the door. As I stepped out into the polished hallway, I kept my pace steady, unhurried. By the time the elevator doors slid shut, the faintest smile had found its way to my lips. Martin believed he'd closed the door on my career. In reality, he just handed me the leverage I needed. I walked into the parking garage with a single, precise thought the game had just shifted, and it was time to redraw the board. The rain streaked across my windshield in silver threads as I eased out of the parking garage and into the steady flow of downtown traffic. The meeting replayed in my head like a bad recording Martin's casual dismissal, the smug curve of his mouth, the way he'd already moved on to his inbox before I'd even left his office. I had a weekend trip booked to a quiet cabin on the Lake Michigan shore. 3 days of silence, fresh air, and no phone reception. It had been the only break I'd allowed myself in years. Now, the thought of going felt indulgent, almost naive. I didn't want rest. I wanted leverage. By the time I reached the light at Monroe and Wabash, the decision had crystallized. The scaffolding I'd been holding up for Martin, the invisible framework that made his work look seamless, was coming down. Not with fanfare, not with confrontation, just gone. The first piece to go was the morning executive briefing. Every day, I distilled sprawling reports into 3 tidy pages Martin could present at the 9:00 a.m., meeting as if the insights were his own. Without them, he'd walk into those rooms blind, back at my desk before the end of the day. I opened the access panel to our main project dashboard. It was my design color-coded, layered, interconnected in ways no one else had fully mastered. My cursor hovered over the Permissions tab for a moment. Then I removed Martin's elevated access. On paper, he could still see it. In practice, it would be useless without the custom views only I knew how to navigate. I logged out, slipped my phone into my bag, and took the elevator to the lobby. The revolving doors gave a gentle push against my shoulder as I stepped into the slick evening air. Behind me, the building glowed with the soft light of cubicles where people still chased deadlines. No one looked up. No one noticed what I'd just done. But the first pin had been pulled from the structure, and I knew exactly how many more it would take before the whole thing shifted under its own weight. By the time I reached my car, the plan had already started to take shape. 5 years ago, I'd walked into Ridgeway Solutions in the middle of what could only be described as a controlled collapse. The previous operations lead had quit without warning, leaving behind no transition plan, no documentation, and most disastrously, no passwords to half of our critical systems. Client histories were scattered across outdated drives, and ongoing projects were already slipping through the cracks. The first week, I commandeered a forgotten conference room on the 14th floor one, with a door that stuck and a single flickering overhead light. From there, I began the slow, methodical process of reverse engineering the chaos. It meant pulling fragments of data from archived emails, cross-referencing half-completed spreadsheets, and making late-night calls to former contractors who still had stray pieces of the puzzle. Most people avoided the work. It was tedious, thankless, and entirely invisible to anyone not in the trenches. But I saw the structure in it, the way the pieces could be rebuilt if placed in the right order. Night after night, I stayed long past the last departing footsteps in the hallway, patching missing data and carefully drafting step-by-step procedures. By the end of the first quarter, I'd stabilized the department. Clients who had been on the verge of leaving were back on schedule. Invoices were current, and projects were once again meeting their deliverables. My guides color-coded, indexed, and updated weekly became the silent backbone of the entire division. Martin, of course, had been more than happy to present those results in quarterly executive meetings, speaking confidently about initiatives he'd overseen. While my name appeared only as a line item in an internal email, I learned quickly that recognition was not the currency here function was, and I became indispensable. Now, back in the present, I powered down my computer at exactly 5 RPM. The screen went black with a satisfying click. My chair rolled silently back as I picked up my bag, the weight of it strangely light. I walked past Martin's glass-walled office without glancing in. He was on the phone, voice tight, gesturing at something on his desk. For the first time in years, I left him to deal with the fire alone. By the second day, the tremors began to show. Mid-morning, an urgent email came in from Garrison Tech, the same deal I'd spotted in Martin's folder. They wanted adjustments to the integration plan before they would sign. Without those changes, the contract would stall. Normally, Martin would stride into the update meeting armed with my distilled notes bullet points, risk flags, suggested talking points. This time, he had nothing. I passed the glass wall of the conference room and saw him standing at the head of the table, flipping through printouts, his voice flat and uncertain. Questions from the client rep hung unanswered in the air. Back at my desk, I opened my inbox and spotted an email chain that had been CC'd to me by accident. Martin had sent it to the COO and CFO, claiming I was withholding cooperation on critical deliverables and failing to prioritize key accounts. The phrasing was careful enough to suggest concern without outright accusation. I saved it in a private folder labeled "For Later." The requests started trickling in from different corners of the office. "Clarice, can you fix the compliance numbers for Garrison?" someone asked. "That's compliance's scope," I replied with a polite smile. Marketing wanted my input on a deliverable timeline. I directed them to their own department lead. I wasn't rude. I wasn't even cold. I simply stayed within the exact boundaries of my role, a perimeter I'd allowed Martin to blur for years, without my quiet intervention. Small inefficiencies began to stack up, slowing the flow of work like grit in a well-oiled gear. By early afternoon, the usual low hum of the office had shifted. Conversations were shorter, sharper. People leaned in over cubicles to whisper. Glancing toward Martin's closed door, I could feel the tension building, the way pressure does in a sealed pipe. When my phone buzzed with yet another urgent request from a team lead, I let it go to voicemail. Instead, I turned back to my own project list, methodically checking off items one by one, letting the rest of the noise swirl past me. The first fractures had appeared. Now it was only a matter of time before something gave way. By the time I woke the next morning, my work phone was a brick of missed communications, 82 calls, stacked one after another. Martin's number appeared the most, but Cole Hastings, the COO, had tried repeatedly too. Even Garrison Tech's CEO had left 3 voicemails. I didn't bother listening to them right away. A quick scan of my inbox painted the picture clearly enough. The quarterly compliance report was past deadline. 2 critical systems were misconfigured after a botched update, and Garrison was threatening to withdraw entirely unless their requested changes were implemented immediately. As I poured my coffee, my personal phone buzzed. It was a message from a Garrison Tech contact I'd worked with closely for years. "If you ever leave Ridgeway, we'd follow you." I stared at the text for a long moment, feeling the weight of what it implied, not just loyalty, but leverage. When I finally walked into the Ridgeway lobby, the atmosphere was taut. Assistants scurried past with armfuls of files, voices hushed but urgent, near the elevators. Martin was pacing like a man waiting for bad medical news. His tie was pulled loose, and a faint sheen of sweat glistened at his collar. The moment he spotted me, he stopped short. "Clarice, where have you?" He cut himself off, glancing around at the passing staff. "We need to talk, now." I kept my expression calm, my tone even. "Of course. Let me just put my things down." His jaw worked, but he nodded, falling into step beside me as we headed toward the executive floor. The tension radiating from him was palpable, a mix of panic and something that felt uncomfortably close to desperation. I hung my coat over my chair and sat, powering on my computer with deliberate slowness. Martin hovered in the doorway like a shadow that couldn't quite decide whether to enter. "Conference room, 5 minutes," he said finally. Before disappearing down the hall, I glanced once more at my personal phone, the message from Garrison still glowing on the screen. Before sliding it into my bag, whatever came next, I wasn't walking into it empty-handed. The boardroom felt like it had been set for a different meeting, folders spread neatly, water glasses lined in front of each chair, but the atmosphere was already charged when I stepped inside. Martin sat at one end, posture rigid, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Cole Hastings, the COO, occupied the head of the table, and the CFO, Dennis Waller, sat opposite Martin, adjusting his glasses as I took my seat. Cole wasted no time. "Clarice, we need your help on the Garrison situation, and we need it now." Martin cleared his throat, his voice forced into something that was meant to sound steady. "You've proven yourself to be indispensable. I'm prepared to recommend you for the senior management position we discussed." I folded my hands in front of me, letting the moment settle. "That's generous," I said evenly. "But I should tell you, another firm has already offered me a senior role. Their salary proposal is considerably higher than my current compensation." Dennis leaned forward, a flicker of interest in his eyes. How much higher? I named the figure. Watching Martin's jaw tighten, Dennis didn't flinch. Instead, he exhaled slowly, as though something had just clicked into place. "The board's been evaluating our leadership structure for some time. We've had concerns about performance at the divisional level." His glance toward Martin was deliberate. "Your departure now, given your role in Garrison and other key accounts, would be highly disruptive." Cole's gaze was steady on me. "Your move here could tip the scales on decisions we've been weighing for months." I'm asking you plainly, what will it take to keep you? The room went still. I could feel Martin's glare, but I didn't look at him. My answer would not be rushed, and it wouldn't be delivered in this exact moment, not when I had more to gain by holding it a little longer. I'll consider your question, I said finally, rising from my chair. But understand, I'm not deciding based on urgency. I'm deciding based on value. Cole nodded once. Slowly, then we'll talk again very soon. I left the room knowing the next conversation would be on my terms. Cole's assistant ushered me into his corner office, where the view of the river cut a silver path through the city. The door closed behind me with a quiet click, shutting out the hum of the executive floor. Cole gestured to the seat across from his desk. I'll get to the point, he said, leaning forward, hands clasped. Director of Systems, you'd report directly to me, no intermediary. Full operational authority. Double your current salary. It was a precise offer, free of flattery. Exactly the kind of language I respected. Still, I didn't answer right away. I want the weekend, I said finally. I don't make decisions like this on adrenaline. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Monday morning. Then, but I hope you understand the weight of what I'm putting on the table. Back at my loft in West Loop that evening, the city lights spilled through the tall windows as I poured 2 glasses of wine. Nadine arrived minutes later, already unwinding her scarf as she stepped inside. She listened as I laid out the offer, pacing the length of my kitchen while I spoke. When I finished, she set her glass down. Is this about fixing things? She asked, or about watching Martin sweat? The question landed harder than I expected. I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it again. Nadine tilted her head. Because from where I'm standing, it could be both. I sank onto the couch, staring at the skyline. It's about not letting him define my worth, and maybe about making sure he can't do this to anyone else. She hesitated, then said quietly, he already has. 2 years ago, a woman in marketing. Brilliant, from what I heard. He blocked her promotion and took her project as his own. She left. The heat in my chest was immediate, sharper than before, so it wasn't just me. This was a pattern. By the time Nadine left, my mind was no longer turning over whether I'd take the role. It was mapping what I could do with it. I was in Cole's office before 8 on Monday, the river still wrapped in a thin mist outside his windows. He set his coffee down as I took the seat across from him. I'll take the position, I said without preamble, but there are 2 conditions. One eyebrow lifted. Go on. First, I want authority to hire my own 3-person team, people I trust, people with the skills to build what this department actually needs. Reasonable, he said, making a note. And the second Martin stays. That got his full attention. After everything, yes. I said, right now. He's a political fixture. If he's removed immediately after I'm promoted, it looks like revenge. It would split the department and give the board a narrative they can't resist spinning. With him in place, I can restructure quietly, and he takes the heat for changes while I build from within. Cole leaned back, studying me. That's unexpectedly strategic. It's necessary. I said, I'm not here to win a single round. I'm here to change how this company functions, and that takes more than one victory. A slow smile formed on his face. Then it's agreed. Martin stays. Effective immediately. All operational matters from his division will pass through your office. I nodded once. Good. By the time I returned to my desk, the official email had already gone out. The subject line, Organizational Realignment New Director of Systems, was followed by a brief note about my expanded responsibilities. Buried in the last sentence was the detail that Martin's operational reporting line would now run through me. From my seat, I could see the moment he read it. His posture stiffened, eyes narrowing just enough to register the shift. Then he glanced toward my office door, expression unreadable, before turning back to his screen. The first of his reports landed in my inbox an hour later. I read it slowly, marking revisions with deliberate care. The next phase had officially begun, the first week in my new role. I pulled up a list of every employee buried in roles that didn't match their skill sets. I'd kept mental notes for years, faces I saw in late-night troubleshooting sessions, names that popped up in system logs at odd hours. Ela Trent was my first call. She'd been tucked away in IT support, fixing minor software issues, but I'd watched her quietly build scripts that solved problems whole teams struggled with. I moved her into a lead systems analyst position, giving her authority to design the automation we desperately needed. Next was Ralph Denford. On paper, he was an administrative assistant, but I'd seen his process diagrams meticulous, clear, efficient. I shifted him into process development, where his designs could shave hours off workflows across multiple departments. Within a month, the difference was visible. Response times shortened, error rates dropped, and even the finance department, usually the last to notice operational improvements, was praising the efficiency gains. Cole sent me a brief email. Impressive start. Keep going. Martin, meanwhile, had been eased into a purely client-facing role. It wasn't a demotion on paper, but it stripped him of the operational control he'd used to shield himself. I could tell he hated it the way his jaw tightened when a client question had to be routed through my team, the stiffness in his voice when he passed me updates. Late one afternoon, he stopped in my doorway. "You know," he said, leaning against the frame, "I blocked your promotion before... Not because you weren't qualified, because I couldn't afford to lose you from my team." I met his gaze evenly. Good managers grow people, even if it means losing them. He looked away first, muttered something I couldn't catch, and left. I didn't expect an apology, and I didn't need one. The work was speaking louder than anything he could say. By the end of that week, Ela's automation rollout was ahead of schedule. Ralph's process maps had been adopted by 3 departments, and the foundation for something bigger was finally taking shape. 6 months later, the numbers told the story better than I ever could. Productivity was up 40%. Voluntary turnover had dropped to the lowest rate in company history, and the Garrison contract had not only been renewed, but expanded to include 2 new service lines. At the industry conference in Boston, their CEO publicly credited Ridgway's visionary operational leadership for the turnaround. I was expecting the board meeting that followed to be the predictable next step, the formal vote to promote me to vice president. Instead, after the usual preamble of quarterly results and polite applause, Dennis, the CFO, slid a different proposal across the table. "Chief Strategy Officer," he said, "part-time." I blinked. Part-time. Cole smiled faintly. "We don't want to lose you to another firm. Clarice, this would give you authority over long-term direction while allowing you the freedom to consult elsewhere. We believe it keeps your influence here and keeps you happy." It was a move I hadn't seen coming, but one that spoke volumes. They were adjusting the rules to keep me something I'd never imagined in my early years at Ridgway. "I'll accept," I said, "on one condition." Cole's eyebrows lifted. "Which is a company-wide talent visibility program. Every division, we surface overlooked employees, track their contributions, and develop them for leadership. No one else gets buried the way I was." There was a pause, then a few nods. Dennis leaned back. Done. That evening, we gathered on the rooftop terrace to mark the quarter's close. The city stretched out below, lights glittering against the dark water of the river. Cole handed me a glass of champagne and raised his own. To the woman who changed the rules without breaking them, he said. I clinked my glass against his and turned toward the skyline. The hum of the city, a steady undercurrent beneath the wind. It was never about climbing the ladder. It was about redesigning it, making sure it had room for people like me, and for those who'd come after. The view was different from here, and so were the rules.